welcome to Design Summit 2020 and to this session on panel building sponsored by Altech. I'm Bob Vaver, Senior Content Director for Machine Design and Hydraulics and Pneumatics, and I'll be your host for today's discussion. Here are some tips about the Design Summit event platform. The first tab on the right of your screen is to chat with our speaker during the presentation, and we'll get to those comments and questions during the presentation. The second tab shows you everyone who's watching this session and allows you to message with those attendees during the live presentation. It is not available in the on-demand version of this presentation. The third tab is for you to rate our speaker and topic area today, and we ask you to fill out this portion at the end of the presentation before returning to the lobby. This will help us improve future presentations. And be sure to head back to the lobby at the end of this presentation to see what's coming next into today's schedule, as well as the other sessions we'll offer during Design Summit 2020. You can also review the next session with the tab on the left side of your screen, and you can also click on the left-hand tab to reference the product demo videos. We're pleased to introduce for this session on panel building Klaus Tum. Klaus is the product director for Altech Corporation, responsible for electrical parts such as circuit breakers, bus bar, and power distribution systems and disconnect switches. Klaus has more than 20 years of electrical experience, and he's a member of the UL Standards Technical Panel team since 2003.
Hello, I'm Dave Crockton, National Sales Manager for Altech Corp. Here in Flemington, New Jersey. Today, I'm here with Altech's Product Director, Klaus Tum, here to discuss UL's role in the evolution of industrial control panels. Klaus, how are you?
Good, Dave. How are you?
Super. Klaus, today we're going to discuss vintage panels, vintage panel components, UL 508A, today's panels, getting UL 508A panels UL approved, the evolution of UL 508, the STP, which is the UL Standards Technical Panel that you've been part of for 20 years. So, I think I was telling you before that when I first started in this industry in the 80s, some of the control panels coming from the United States kind of did look like this. They were kind of rat's nests, wires all over the place, open construction, connectors all over the place, not safe according to today's standards. And it all kind of changed after a while, but even in the 90s, we were still using some of the components like this, the open construction terminal block. These terminal blocks were mounted to the control panel by screwing the screws into the back of the panel, or even double-face tape. I used to see that too. But that had to be done for every single terminal block. So you would have 2 holes for every strip throughout the whole panel. So that was a lot of drilling, and it was not a safe panel at all compared to, like I said, today's standards. Until the European design of the DIN rail came to the United States industry.
Yeah, Dave, I remember really the DIN rail, or the wave of the DIN rail coming to America, sort of was the foundation of Altech Corp, really, because we started selling DIN rails and all the components which go with the DIN rail. Coming back to the panel mount components, so it was really hard in case a component was broken or shorted to replace it, because you had only a certain amount of real estate in your panel to replace them. You wanted to see maybe if the mounting holes lined up, etc., etc. So now you had the form and fit function problem, and then you had the overall functionality problem too, because obviously you had to maintain the electrical ratings of these components. And so you will really be put in a corner with all these panel mount components, and let's not even mention what you already said before. They are all open type constructions, so they are not really safe. Any non-licensed electrician or any just some maintenance person opening a panel could get electrocuted very easily by not even thinking about that all these connection points are live. So with the DIN rail then also came essentially a lot of touch-proof components. So if we go to the next picture, we are showing an old component, an old panel versus a new panel, if you just use all the DIN rail components, it becomes a much more streamlined and safer panel. And really, now we wanted to talk about UL. UL is all about safety. That is their first concern. So now to get to industrial control panels, UL 508A industrial control panels are defined by the National Electrical Code as an assembly of two or more power circuit components, control circuit components, or any combination of power and control circuit components. You have different types of industrial control panels. It can be general use ones, which could be controls of heaters, lighting, motor or pump loads, or combination of these loads. Then there can also be specific equipment control component panels, which could control industrial machinery, cranes, refrigeration equipment, and fountains. And there also can be either open or enclosed. What I mean by that is they can come in a whole overall metal panel, or they can just come as an open, mounted to a back panel plate of a panel, panel, so to speak. Sorry to repeat panels constantly. But then the user mounts it in a larger, bigger panel where they have the space for the smaller back plate. So really, there are the two different types, open and enclosed. Obviously, we are more used to seeing enclosed ones, but you can build an open type UL 508 approved panel, a 508A approved panel. I'm sorry. So now if we go to the next slide, we will see that essentially UL 508A is the user manual of how to build a 508A panel. So it outlines various installation instructions, and it outlines obviously what components you should be using. You can find a list of essentially every component which is already vetted by UL through various other tests, through various other standards, to be used in a UL 508A UL approved panel. So you can just go to the back of the standard and go to the requirements for components, which used to be the supplement SA. It has been replaced a couple of years ago. But it's essentially still most of the same thing. You see a table, I don't know, it goes over, I believe, 50 pages of components and what they can be used for, and what the standard it was tested to, and what the category control number is. So in case you need to find one of these components, you can go to ul.com, go to the product IQ page, search for the category control number if you need one of these components, and it will spit out all the manufacturers who have components approved to that category control number. Another big thing with panels is determining the short circuit current rating. At one point, UL decided that it was important to essentially mark the panel to what type of short circuit current rating it can withstand to without additional upstream protection. So there are various ways of determining the short circuit current rating. It's outlined in another supplement. This supplement is still active, and it's called Supplement SB. It shows you how to calculate the the overall rating or how to determine the rating if you don't want to do the calculation. Some of the calculations are very cumbersome and difficult. So there are other methods of determining the rating. Unfortunately, most of these methods then will bring you to a lower short circuit current rating. So when you install this panel, you then have to make sure that your rated or your SSCR rating is essentially not exceeding or is equivalent or better than the available short circuit current rating at your installation site. In addition, UL 508A even gives you guidelines on how to install the panel and what to do. For example, there are wire bending radiuses for each wire has a wire bending radius. If you use too small of a wire bending radius and too large of a wire, you might either damage the insulation or you might actually damage the wire, the copper, or the aluminum part itself. So there are guidelines for that. Obviously, we talked about interrupting capacity ratings. Are you using UL listed or are you using UL recognized components? It does not mean that you have a UL 508A listed panel. You need to use all listed components. I will go to that in a little bit more detail onto the next slide. But everything is lined out and in the standard itself. You also still should, obviously follow the National Electrical Code or maybe some local installation guides or some guidance of the inspector at your local site if that is an issue. Then again, what I mentioned earlier on, it's all about safety. So make sure it's safe and it's functional, and make sure that the control circuit and the power circuits are visually separated. And again, just use common sense and maintain all these practices, and the panel will be approved or will be okayed by UL. If you don't follow any of these, you risk that you don't get the panel approved. If we go now to the next slide about the description of terminology, this is essentially a snapshot of how to build a panel. It shows you the power circuit, and it shows you the control circuit, and it shows you an example of a different power circuit, which is step down, transformed to maybe a different voltage from the higher voltage or the higher supply voltage. It lines out all the components which should be used where and what that component should be. So you can just go to that page and then pick out your component. You can go back to the requirements for components, 49 pages in the back of the standard. Pick out your component and then go and figure out, okay, what is my category control number, and search for my component, and then you are certain that nobody will flag that component because you did your due diligence to pick the right component for the right position in the panel. We here at Altech are essentially emphasizing a little bit on circuit protection. For one of our literatures, we are using essentially that description of terminology page. Ran it through our marketing department, made it a little bit more colorful, and then popped in the essentially supplementary / miniature circuit breaker applications you have to see, or you have to follow according to UL 508A. So Altech has two different manufacturers, miniature circuit breaker lines in their offering. Both lines offer 3 different UL standard ratings. The main rating is UL 49. You can see in the upper or middle left-hand corner of the panel picture a large molded case circuit breaker, and then to the left of that, in the middle of the middle one, is the miniature molded case circuit breaker. So you can use that miniature molded case circuit breaker at the incoming of the transformer, which is stepping down the voltage from a higher voltage to a lower voltage on the right side of the shown of the power circuit. In addition, you have a 508 breaker, which, by the way, we were the first ones in the industry promoting a UL 508 circuit breaker. I call it circuit breaker because it looks like a circuit breaker, but according to UL it is just a manual motor controller, but with disconnecting means. Customers used to use these miniature circuit breakers, which also came from Europe, as switching device. They were initially only certified to or recognized under UL 1077. But then UL was telling us we need to go and make sure that they can be switched with. So we essentially used all the requirements out of 508, which are much more stringent. And again, don't confuse 508 with 508A. We are now talking 508 is a component standard. So we took the requirements for 508, went through a very stringent test regimen, and got the ultimately or initial 1077 circuit breaker approved to 508 with disconnecting means. So what that enables you is you have a bank of breakers, and you don't need to shut off the main to switch off your load or service your load downstream. If you have a bank of 1077 supplementary protectors, which we offer, by the way, as well, shown on the bottom there with the green line through it, you would essentially, not to violate UL or the code, you would have to turn off the main to then service your load downstream. In addition, just alone the UL standards, we have some unique mechanical features in our 2 different series. The one series is has a built-in ring tongue function, which is very beneficial to people or customers who build panels for the export market to Asia, because Asian standards require ring tongue terminations on all their main circuit components. In the old days, we would have a separate part number, it would have had a long lead time, and it would need to meet a minimum to get a ring tongue version. Now, with this version here, we have ring tongue capability built in. So that's a unique feature only Altech offers in the industry. On the flip side, our second line has a little bit different features. They have an on-off indicator. They use a thermoplast housing, where the ring tongue version breaker manufacturer uses a duroplast housing, which is a little bit more brittle. Also, the right side breaker has 2 removable DIN rail clips, whereas the other one only has 1 removable DIN rail clip. So there are small mechanical differences. Main difference is the ring tongue capability. So you are very flexible with Altech and their miniature circuit breaker line to essentially cover all your UL508A panel needs in regards to circuit protection when it comes to the smaller miniature circuit breakers, to just generalize them all without getting into details about which standard they comply to. I had talked earlier about UL508A talks about installation practices and safe installation practices. One thing you probably see all the time, again, I talked about having a bank of breakers. Yeah, how do you get all the power distributed to a bank of breakers? So usually, Dave had mentioned before, a rat's nest. This looks like a little bit of a rat's nest. To streamline that, in Europe, they use a bus bar. It's called a bus bar. It's essentially a solid piece of copper housed in a plastic insulation. The phases are insulated from each other, and you have a quick and easy installation there. Solid installation, no problem or no risk of daisy chaining, mixing wires, skipping a phase or anything like that. You pick the right bus bar for the right breaker application. You only install this once.
Let me just add real quick that on our webpage we did a time test, if you remember, and we did the bus bar and then we did the daisy chaining. We did too good of a job at the daisy chaining because it's very neat. But after ferrules, and you're stripping the wires, ferruling the wires, and then making sure your phases are correct, tightening down on the wires to make sure they're consistent. Compared to the bus bar where the phases are already done, the connections are going to be consistent. It's very safe. It's all touch proof. There's no splicing wires. There's no wires that are fraying off. And the time test was, at least, I don't know, an eighth difference. It was just huge, of course. It's a little more expensive, but it's a lot more safer, and it does save on labor.
Yeah, and again, it's all about really safety. At the end of the day, yeah, you can replace a component, but you cannot replace a life. So again, UL is all about safety. We are all about safety. That's our highest goal, really. So anyhow, so just to tell you a little bit more about what we offer here at Altech, we have most DIN rail components you need for a UL508A panel. We have various lines of terminal blocks. We have all the colors, all the levels, all the internal components. We have dedicated product managers here for dedicated product lines. So we have specialists on site here to talk about and help you with selecting the right component for your UL508A panel. Anyhow, we have some unique components. For example, we have a capacitor-based UPS, which is very unique here in the industry. Usually it's all battery-based. Now capacitor-based, really, you don't have to worry about a battery going dead at the time when you really need it, or the battery doesn't charge anymore. The only drawback for the capacitor-based is it can only do it for a few minutes, versus obviously a battery can do it for as long as it can keep its charge. But again, we have a specialist here in-house which can help you select the right capacitor-based UPS system for your application. And we just want to point that out that we have about probably 80% of what you need to go in a 508A panel. We have that available here at Altech. coming back to safe installation, safe and clean installation practice. Yeah, we also have wire duct. The DIN rail is shown here. So with the DIN rail, with wire duct, everything is just much more neat and much more safe. Again, we give the installer all the tools to make sure that the panel looks like this. Yeah, you have a nice and neat panel. Everybody feels good about it. There, even when the door is open, nobody really has to worry about getting electrocuted or anything like that. And so it's all about having a nice panel available for you, for your own use, or for your customers' use. So now the next question becomes, okay, how do I get a UL 508A panel UL approved? So obviously there are two ways. One way is the same way like you get any component UL approved. You go to UL, say, hey, here's my component, or here's my panel. What do I have to do to get this UL approved? So UL will run all sorts of tests to get your panel UL approved. Obviously there will be some sort of a fee to do so. So that fee is only really economical if you build a lot of these panels, all the same, using all the same components, and doing it like that. So if you want to keep your flexibility, so to speak, but you still want to build a UL 508A UL approved panel, you also have the way of going like in regards, you can go to an industrial control panel shop program. What that means is you become a UL certified panel shop. You have to go through training. You have to have at least one dedicated technician on staff. He's called a manufacturer's technical representative, and he will assure that all the 508A guidelines in the panels are met. Yeah, so you have to document all your components you're using. You have to make sure you mark it according to the marking requirements of the panel. You have to install it and wire it according to the guidelines I mentioned before. You have to make sure that all the again, description of terminologies, all these components are used in the right application and in the right position of the panel, and you have to document all that. So if you pass the initial test and the initial audit of UL, then you can build your own panels. Again, you need to document everything, but then you will have only essentially 4 unannounced visits of the UL inspector to your facility per year, and he essentially makes sure that you have all the documentation for your panels, that you're applying the right label to it, the right UL sticker, which, by the way, you can purchase from UL, and that your MTR, it's called, the manufacturer's technical representative, is still there, his training is current, etc., etc. So it's a big process, but if you buy a UL 508A approved panel from a UL approved panel shop, you make sure, or you assure that you have a safe and a UL conform panel.
So the MTR is an employee of the panel shop. You send him to UL to get certified, and then he's in the shop at all times. He's not a UL employee. He's actually an employee of the panel shop. Okay.
Correct, David. Yeah. So it's really again it's all about safety. For example, I read to prepare for this little presentation here. I read some things where people take the UL listing mark of the panel, the metal enclosure essentially, as the UL approved listing mark for the UL 508A panel. You cannot make that mistake if you want to be sure you have all your ducks in a row with UL. So UL listed is not equal to UL listed. UL recognized is not equal to UL recognized. Applying a component in its intended application is one thing. Just applying a component randomly might negate the UL approval. So you really have to be careful. That's why that 508A standard is 200 pages long. So there's a lot to go by, but it's worth it at the end, because you have a safe and UL conform panel. Now, one of the other things I would like to talk about briefly is the evolution of UL 508A. So 508 and 508A is close, obviously, and in writing or however you want to call it, and people sometimes interchange them, which is not really correct, and maybe that's even part of the reason why UL is migrating from the UL 508 standard to an actual harmonized international standard called UL 6947 dash and then various dashes. For example, I'm here at Altech, I get customer calls daily and people ask me, I need UL 508A approved components. There are no UL 508A approved components. There are UL 508 approved components, but they are not UL 508A approved components. Again, going back to the big page with the power circuit and the control circuit and the smaller power circuit, all these components comply to different standards. You just have to use the right component in the right position for the panel. That then makes your 508A panel. UL 508 points to industrial control components, not panels, components. So that you have to completely set that aside from each other to make sure you don't confuse the terminology. But anyhow, that is just on a side note. The bigger part is UL started probably about 10 years ago to try to harmonize 508 with especially IC standards. Problem is, it's very timely, very costly, very difficult, very complicated to get all these components in 508, UL 508 approved, listed, most of them. And then I want to export them to Europe or other parts of the world, and all of a sudden, I only have a UL approval. I don't have an IEC approval. I don't have any other kind of approval. So UL essentially took the 508 standard, picked it apart, looked at where they could overlap it with similar component standards, mostly from Europe, IEC standards, and then marry them with a new UL standard which has a UL and a 60 pretty much in front. Essentially, no, the 60 comes from IC, but anyhow, so you marry the old 508 with, or a part of the 508 with a standard coming out of IC, you get a new UL 60 947 dash XX standard. So there are still national differences, they are called, just because of maybe some test regimens are different, voltages are different across the globe. So you have to really see how you can test them. But for example, you go to motor starters and go to the horsepower table, all the voltages of all the different supply systems all over the world are mentioned there. So you can get any horsepower rating for any respective voltage tested under UL, or now UL 69447. So that is like, it's maybe each standard now is a little bit smaller and a little bit more product focused than when 508 was this summary of all these industrial control components, and it was really difficult to get through that, interpret the standard, making sure what parts of the tests do I have to apply to my part or to my components I want to test. So it was a little bit convoluted, let me call it like that. Now UL 69.4 something, it's really more focused on the product. And by the way, I just see a little bit of a typo there. All the 947s should be 947s, not 942 or 944. But that's just a minor little hiccup. So that is that. And then...
So wait. So how does it work with the CSA? We have testing facilities here that they accept, but then CSA has their own testing facilities also. Do they have UL testing facilities in Canada?
Good question, Dave. So CSA is their own NRTL, National Recognized Test Lab for Canada. UL is the main one here for like the USA. So there are about another 10 national recognized test labs, NRTLs it's called, in the US, but all of them really base their testing on onto UL standards. So when CSA tests, they have their own set of standards, but most of them have been married to UL standards for a long time, almost like a pre-phase of this 508, picking 508 apart. CSA and UL always worked very closely together. That's why you have the CUL-US or the CUR-US or the CCSA-US or markings available for a long time, because UL can say, okay, I test this product to UL, but I can also test it to CSA. The same way CSA can do the same, I test it to CSA, but I also test it to UL. So there are again some minor national differences in each standard, but the core of the standard is pretty much the same. Again, some of the voltages in Canada are higher than here. Yeah, industrial voltage sometimes goes up to 600 volt, where here in America, in the US, it's mostly 480 then. But again, it's 508 picked apart, but it's the same thing with CSA versus UL. They work together on a lot of standards. For example, that harmonization of the IEC standard, CSAs involved in that too. So all these standards will also have a CSA number. So it's all, at the end of the day, we want to make sure parts are safe, parts are tested according to their national differences, but they can all be tested and it still can be somewhat economical for the customer. So one last thing, talking about UL-STP, which is a standards technical panel. In the earlier slide, I was talking about, how do we pick UL 508 apart, so to speak, and bring it into the fold with all these IEC standards. Behind these efforts are obviously people. Each standard at UL has a standards technical panel behind it. That standards technical panel consists out of various organizations out of the industry. It could be an industrial user, it could be a consumer, it could be, they call it a general person when they don't have a drawer for them, so to speak. It could be a manufacturer, it could be a member of an NRTL, National Testing Laboratory. It could be from essentially from a supply chain area. So I am part of the UL-STP for a few standards, including 508A and formerly 508, which now obviously split up in various UL 60, 940 standards. But that is really the backbone of how to maintain, how to improve on, how to innovate these standards, how to make sure the standards stay up to date, with any kind of influence from the industry, for example, in regards to innovations. 5G, for example, the whole talk about the what is it called? The everything like AI, all that. Sorry, I have a little blank here, but AI and all that stuff. So everything is computer controlled panels, all that. In the old days you just had discrete components. There was no communications going on. Now everything communicates with everything. So you want to make sure the standards keep up. So UL has committees essentially which are chaired by a UL employee, essentially the specialist for the standard, most of the time the PDE of the standard, principal engineer of the respective standard, and then he has one person from UL assisting him, and then the rest is really just industry from all over. Again, the categories I mentioned earlier, the industry from anywhere, going to these panel meetings. Some panels meet yearly, some panels meet every 5 years, and anything in between really is possible. It really just depends on how many proposals, they call them, are submitted for changing the standard, fixing the standard, modifying the standard, bringing it up to the newest levels of innovation. So, for example, 508A usually meets every year because that is really a fast-moving standard, because all these components come together in a 508A panel. So, again, re-emphasize, UL pretty much proclaims that they are looking out for safety first, you have a 508A panel, you know you have a safe panel. There goes a lot into the standard. There goes a lot into the standard making process and maintaining process. So UL is trying to keep this all together on a daily basis. And we are just trying to help here at Altech. We're just trying to help the customer pick the right component so they don't get flagged by a UL inspector. So with this, I'm pretty much done rambling.
Well, I think the evolution of the panels, the UL panels, is really the evolution of safety. As mentioned before, the earlier panels weren't safe, and now going into so many different panel shops and UL 508 panel shops, there's one thing that I always notice. These guys are really proud of their panels. You know, they want to show you they're clean. They're easy to identify everything. There's more space in the panel. It might have been the same size panel they had before, but there's more space because everything is so neat and tidy. So it's kind of neat the way it's gotten to that point, and it's probably just going to get better from here. But no, I appreciate it, spending time with your class. I appreciate you explaining everything to us, and I hope everybody else got something out of that.
Yeah, no, thank you, Dave. And then obviously now these days, I hope everybody stays safe and healthy. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thanks, Klaus, for this presentation. And to our viewers, we'd like to remind you that you can interact with today's speakers and with each other by using the chat tab on the right of your screen. The session will now be available for on-demand viewing, so feel free to come back and rewatch at any point over the next 90 days.